First name is Charles, Charles. Last name is Pace, Pace. Chuck is just a nickname, but I would prefer to be called Chuck. In 1954 I started. I was 6 years old. Really excited because you got to see different people that you normally didn't see every day. You saw people from Limestone, people from Telford, Chucky, just a different atmosphere than what you were used to. One sister, I went to school with her. Her name is Sherri. My sister is 1 year younger. I lived in Jonesville, right up on Spring Street. We walked to school, or some days my dad would bring us, but there was no bus back in those days for us. I think the bus went to Johnson City, to Langston. No, my dad brought me on the first day, but every day after that we walked to school. My dad worked for the post office, so that's back when the mail was on the trains, and he had to be at the post office at a certain time. So this day he just brought me to Miss Brown's, to these big windows here, and handed me right in the window to her. That was probably every memory here was a fond memory. You'd come here on Monday mornings, and the janitors had been here, and had put the sweeping compound down on the steps. Had a different smell. Like I say, this is Miss Brown's classroom. In the center was a cafeteria, and in the upper part was, back in those days, I think Ernest McKinney was probably the principal, before Miss Sylvers was. And I think he's the principal here 1 year. I was under him for 1 year, but every year after that, I was under Miss Sylvers was the principal. And back here was the gymnasium, and the girls' bathroom was here. Girls' bathroom was here, and the boys' bathroom was up the hallway there. Well, my best friend was probably Joseph Price. He was from Limestone. He was my age. When we came in, there was 2 first grade tables right here where you all sit, and one back there. Then you had the second grade, the third grade, and the fourth grade was over against the wall. I know in the third grade, Joseph Price and myself, we shared a seat because there wasn't enough room in that row for all the seats to be there. So the whole year we shared a seat. He would scoot over and I'd sit beside of him. And another thing, I got these bib overalls on, but he wore bib overalls every day. They were from Limestone, and they were what we considered farmers. They just dressed a little bit different than what we did, because we weren't in the city by no means. We still dressed differently than what they did. Well, we played every day together. Now down here in the lower part where the parking lot is now, we had a softball field, and right here along the fence was another field to play too. First recess was about 10 o'clock, which is about 30 minutes recess, and then after lunch we had an hour recess, and we had one recess in the afternoon before we went home. But Joseph and I, we was inseparable for the first 6 years, really. In the 9th grade, you graduated Booker T in the 8th grade. Well, then you went on to Langston High School. But I asked my dad, could I go to Langston in the 8th grade? So I left here, my last year was the 7th grade, because I wanted to get a head start on, not being pushed into it, but just, I wanted to go on my own in the 8th grade. And I went to Langston High School, 8th, 9th, and 10th grade. Now in 1965, we had started the school year for my junior year at Langston. But my dad told me, he said, son, they're going to integrate the schools. And I thought, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I just thought that, But the bus driver picked us up, which was Mr. James Rollins. Now he lived down in Telford. No, he lived in Limestone. So he, instead of him, now we'd gone to Langston for 2 weeks in this school year. But instead of us going to Langston, he just dropped us off at Jonesboro High School. And Earl Henley, he was the principal at Jonesboro High School. He met us in the cafeteria, and he took us all into the office, and we all got our classes straightened out, and what we were going to do and what we were going to take, subjects we were going to take. And because all these years we'd gone to a segregated school, and then like 65, like I say, now some of these kids that I went to when we integrated, I had played with them for years here in town and everything, just wasn't able to go to school with them. So, like I say, in 60, and I was the first black kid to graduate Jonesboro High School in 1966. There was another girl in the class too, her name was Linda Vaught. I don't think she's attended any of these, but we were the first 2 to graduate Jonesboro High School in 1966. But now getting back to here, this was like the pillar of the community, because you went to school here, you would have Thanksgiving dinners here that all the kids would sell tickets for, then all the parents would come, and parents from Limestone and Telford. But like I say, for Thanksgiving, I remember, I think the tickets were about $3 for a lunch or dinner, And this one girl named Shirley Clark, she would always outsell everybody in tickets, and she got some kind of award for it. I don't know what it was, a little cash, I don't know what it was, but it was a fundraiser, yeah. I guess it was to really cover the cost of the meal. While I was here, I think there were about 5 different cooks. Now, my uncle cooked here for a while. His name was Henry Greenlee. And there was another lady named Miss Birdwell, a lady from Limestone whose name was, first name was, we always called her Sis. Her last name was Woodson. I think the first cook here was a Patton lady, and she was the first cook. But like I say, the meals were made here. And Miss Brown would come in, and now some of the older girls, like Mary Catherine Ray, she told me that all the older girls used to go into the cafeteria about 11 o'clock and help Miss Brown get the lunch meal out, which I never paid much attention to that. We're always out playing, but and they were really good meals too. Sometimes it's a better meal than what you got at home. My sister and I never brought our lunch. Now, some of the other kids did bring their lunch, and I think lunch was only about 25 cents back in those days. And Miss Sylvers would always, after lunch, she had an ice cream box, a freezer there, and she would sell ice cream after lunch, brown mules, cream dreamsicles, popsicles, for a nickel a piece, It was just a good time, This place, Booker T and Bethel Christian Church, were a pillar of the black community. They had a janitor. Like I say, when I was in the 5th, 6th, and 7th grade, there's a guy named George Johnson. He was the janitor. There was a guy before him which is Hugh Dean. Now my cousin did he had a job here keeping the furnace going, and he was older than I was. Starlin Perry was his name. So I would come down here some mornings to help him get the clinkers out of the furnace, But then I'd just stay and go on to school after that. But he was paid for that. Now, one of the chores we had, Miss Sylvers would take up the lunch money. About 10 o'clock, everybody would bring their lunch money up. So we'd have to take it to the bank, down to First People's Bank. And she'd always send myself and a guy named Henry Stevenson, and we'd take the money to the First People's Bank along with her bank receipts, They'd fill that out and we'd deposit the money. Sometimes we'd go to Lavender's Supermarket, bring back potatoes and stuff like that. There was a big storeroom in the kitchen where, now I never knew this, but some of the older people told me that at first the county didn't pay for the meals, and I guess it was the parents' responsibility, and that money that was given for lunch money to buy the meals. And later on they started to the county started to provide the meal, the groceries, I guess you would want to. And they had a big set of curtains in that auditorium. Had Booker T. Washington on, just initials, big velvet curtains on a chain because you'd have a commencement program every year at the end of school, but it was a no-no to swing on those curtains, because I guess they were expensive, but everybody swung on them. But you gotta, if you were caught, you got a few licks with the paddle. Well, and there was one girl in my class named Yolanda Howard. She lived right down here where this fancy house is on Spring Street. Now she would go home every day for lunch because she just lived down the hill there. But everybody else, like saying, like some of the kids from Limestone, they'd bring their lunches, but all the time we ate here. Regretted asking my dad if I could go in 8th grade, because it's just, we changed classes there. Well, we didn't here. We were all in one room, so it was kind of hard to get used to. But you learn to adapt to it. So I did. But in Johnson City, we were always classified as the farmers too. They call us country boys, and there's just things that you didn't like to hear back in those days. When I went to Jonesboro High School, like I say, a lot of these kids I had played with for years. I was really treated better at Jonesboro High School than I was at Langston High School. I mean, the students. The teachers at Langston they treated everybody the same. I guess biggest thing to get used to was all the kids that you had never been around before. Everybody was kind of probably nervous the day that we went to Jonesboro High School to start school there. But like I say, everybody just blended right in. And there was never 1 ounce of trouble as I can remember. Because I talked to some of the kids that went to school there, and they had told me that Earl Henley had an assembly, and Earl Henley was the principal, and he had an assembly with the kids that were already there on Friday and told them what was going to happen on Monday. And there wasn't going to be any trouble, is what he expressed to them. And there wasn't any trouble. In this whole little town, I lived here all my life, I can remember no trouble whatsoever racially. It was just there was places in town we couldn't go back in the 50s and 60s, but you adapted to that too. That was just the way it was, and our biggest mode of transportation was bicycles. We rode our bicycle. I lived way up here, and we played on Depot Street down in other end of town. But I was always asking my dad, could I ride my bicycle to school, but he never would let me. Just you had to walk, or he'd either pick you up. One reason I got hit on a bicycle up here once. Now, Norman Howard, he was a class above me. We were up here on the Jonesboro Highway, and I'd ask my dad, and I asked my mom, could I go riding with Norman? He was older than me. She said no. So I went outside and I asked my dad, could I go? And he said yes. So we went. I'm trying to remember, where the Brawls Florist is out here. So about 3 or 4 houses up was where Miss Birdwell lived, who was a cook. So I remember riding up into her driveway so I could get a start up the hill. And Norman was out in the street watching the traffic, I don't know what happened, but anyway, I ran right out in front of a car, So the next thing I can remember is this is back when Dillo Taylor, they ran an ambulance service. I woke up on the way to the hospital and I just saw that Dillo Taylor sign, on the side of that ambulance. It knocked me out when it hit me, really, in the hospital for about a couple of months from that, because it broke this leg. Miss Sylvers came to the house. When I was discharged from the hospital, she came to the house 3 times a week and taught me when I was in the 5th grade, so I wouldn't get behind. There was a lot of positive things about Miss Sylvers that I liked. She made you learn. You had to have I don't think it was every day, but you had to have a current event out of the newspaper. It may have been 3 times a week, and you had to get up and read it before the class and kind of discuss what was going on, Now, some of these old boys from Limestone, they never did learn to spell. There was a row of hedges out here. So at lunchtime, she'd send the bigger boys out there to get the switches. Now, for every word that I think you'd have 20 words on your spelling test. For every word that you missed, you got to lick with the switch. Now, I guess that'd be child abuse today. You couldn't do that today. But some of the kids from Limestone, they never did learn to spell. Those kids, they hated her because of the, that corporal punishment that she had done to them. But like I say, I have nothing to say bad about Miss Sylvers, because like I say, she taught me, motivated me, and when I went to Langston, I was pretty much in step with everybody else, Whereas I thought if I went into the 9th grade, I'm going to be behind. So if I go up here 1 year early, I'll get a head start on this. Like I say, a different atmosphere at Langston was. Now, we had an old coal furnace here too. So some of the boys would go down there and pee in the furnace. They would. It'd turn the whole school out, because the smell, the radiators was right along this wall, and the smell would come through that. And this one old boy done it all the time. Finally, they found out he was doing it and turned the school out. And school, also snow days. Back in those days, it snowed a lot. So you might be out of school for 2 weeks at a time. But we never got behind. There was a play every year, and Miss Sylvers, she would get all the material, and you'd maybe school was out in May, I believe. So probably about March or April, she started practicing you for that play. And I remember this one specific play. It was called School's Out in Tater Holler. It was more or less like a hillbilly play, because everybody had a part in that play, and you had to get up on the stage. And well, that kind of scared me, because at commencement, you'd have all these kids' parents from Limestone, places that you had never seen these kids' parents before, and you had to get up on the stage and what we call recite your speech or your part in the play, and that it always kind of made me feel nervous to get in front of a crowd like that. Miss Brown, she would always play the piano at commencement, and we would have programs, like assembly probably a couple times a month, and she'd always play the piano for that too. And every morning we recited the Pledge of Allegiance. And I remember we singing Dixie, way down south in Dixie. I don't remember where the songs, if we had song books or anything, I don't remember. Or if Miss Brown just taught you the songs, I don't remember that. We always got to use books. And you could see in a book that you had, for the white kids that had the book the year prior to you, because their name, you had to put your name in the book. And so then we'd put our name down, as a recipient of that year. And some of the girls from Limestone, the books, the covers were always worn out, more or less, All the other girls would make covers out of brown paper bags, and make them and dress them up somewhat, And they look good, but you were responsible for that book no matter how bad a condition it was in when you got it. And there used to be a library truck that would come maybe once a month too, park right out in the parking lot. You could go on that book truck and check out a book, and then within the 2 weeks, I think, or so, you would have to have it read and turn it back in. I didn't graduate from here, so I wouldn't remember the graduation, but they tell me that the 8th grade did have a graduation. Like I say, I went on to Langston in the 8th grade. And every day I'd come, sometimes I'd get off that bus and I'd come by and tell Miss Sylvers how much I regretted leaving here, going there in the 8th grade, because it was, but if I thought about it, I was going to have to go in the 9th grade anyway. I graduated in '66. And I tried to go to college over in Berea, Kentucky, and because a friend of mine, we both had a job for the city of Johnson City under the Cedar program. And he came by one day and he said, "Do you want a full-time job for the summer?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd like to have one." So we both worked for the city of Johnson City. But probably about 2 or 3 months into our working season, he told me he was going to school in Berea, Kentucky, and I'd made up my mind I had enough school, But I kind of I did look up to him, so I said, so I put in my application and everything over Berea, and they sent me the information back. Said you need to go to junior college first. Well, then it was close to the draft. I'd fooled around, and my dad told me, said they're going to draft you if you don't get into school somewhere. I don't, but he kept up with it because, like I say, he worked down at the post office. I had an aunt, she was in the Navy, and she'd stayed 20 years in the Navy, so she talked to me, and I decided to go in the Navy because Vietnam was really going on heavy back in those days. So I had a friend at Jonesboro High School, John Harlan. He had graduated Jonesboro High School and gone to Vietnam, and then the news came back to school that he was killed over there, So it did now that really gave me some incentive to get into the Navy, So I stayed 8 years in there. The first 4 when I came home, I met her in Johnson City. I lived that was the second 4 years. And I lived I had shore duty up at Great Lakes, Illinois. And so I asked her if she wanted to go back up there. And we lived in Navy housing for a couple of years. Then it was my turn to go back on a ship again. I'd already done 7 years, and she never did like that Navy way of life, So we came back here, and then I went to work for the VA hospital. She went to work for a place called Kennemetal. And by then we had, one son was born in the Navy, and the other son was born after I got out of the military. Three kids altogether, 1 daughter, 5 grandchildren, I think, and 1 great-grandchild. I did get 20 years in the military because I joined the National Guard, and then I was sent to Saudi Arabia, to Kuwait, and I went to Desert Storm. That kind of bothered me because I said, well, I've already done 8 years in the Navy. Now I'm turning around here and join this, because I never had any idea that you could be activated to go to a war. Just didn't even think about that. It never dawned on me. And so I went to Saudi Arabia, and I stayed over there for about 11 months. And then I just decided I'm going to get out. But then I've got 12 years in. Too late to get out then. But the very day I got 20 years in, the very day. And then there was no more drilling for me because I wasn't going to take a chance of ever being activated again. Miss Brown never did drive a car. She always got a taxi back and forth to school. A man named Buddy Grisham, he ran the cab station in Jonesboro. He'd bring her to school every morning, and he'd take her home every afternoon. Now Miss Sylvers, she had she had a car. Well, one of these old boys, like I say, they got a switching every Friday. When we went to town to get the groceries, he went in the hardware store and got a big old 16-penny nail, one nail. And then he stuck it in her tire. So she had an assembly that day, and she said the Jonesboro Police Department was going to come up here and take fingerprints on that nail, you know, which they weren't, you know.
Oh my God!
But she scared him enough that he admitted to putting that nail in her tire, you know. And I don't remember what. I think his parents had to pay for the tire or something like that. And every day we put the flag up out here too. And the bigger boys put the flag up, and we always taught not to let that flag touch the ground. Yeah. It was just a fun time. I'm telling you, it really was. And just sometimes they just have random dinners, you know, and people would get, because it's really about the only place you had to get together with everybody. It's up here in the church. Not here, but the guy I was telling you about, Hugh Dean, who was the janitor. Now he would get all the kids that lived up here on this end of town. No, we'd have it down on Depot Street. And we had an old ball field down there that we played ball in during the summer. And he'd have a Winnie Rose for us, you know. That was like a meeting place too. Everybody came together as the only field to play in, you know, because you couldn't play on other fields. The field actually belonged to the railroad. We just cleaned it off and kept it clean. I remember when I first saw Jules, but I was going home and I saw them coming out. And because it was getting in disrepair, you know. So I saw them coming out, and I said, can I go in there, because I used to go to school there, you know. Well, then it just opened up Pandora's box. We started talking about, they wanted to know how the classrooms were situated and this, but I feel it's a good thing, you know. I mean, rather than just see it dilapidate, you know, I think it's a good thing myself. Now, Miss Brown, she was a big lady too, you know. And she had a little paddle in her desk, you know. If you got a lick, she'd take her big hands right here and she'd make your pants real tight, you know, so you could feel that paddle come through. But we used to put thumbtacks in her seat. She never did feel them, because when she'd get up, you know, you could see those thumbtacks sticking in her dress, but she never felt them. Now my mom told me that Miss Brown taught her in school, so she was here for a long time. My mom went to school here, and my dad too. Wow. Now my dad went to school down here. Now another one that would be interesting person to talk to is Henry Stevenson. Everybody claims that Miss Brown kept failing Henry because he'd go down the store every day and get her bologna and crackers and cheese. Like I say, this little town. Have you heard on the news where this Jonesboro the population has skyrocketed? People are moving here. That back when I grew up, there were 3 policemen, and there was one red light in town. That was down at Mock's. No, there was another one on out the road, on out the street there. There's 2 red lights in this whole town. Just a different time.